Good morning. Thank you all for being here with us again today. Today will be the third and I think last installment of the public hearings to do with the inquiry into the operations of the National Flour Mills. So in the course of today's sitting, I'm pleased to say that joining us will be the Honorable Minister of Agriculture, Senator Clarence Rambarat. When he comes in, we will take a slight break so that the seating arrangements can be recalibrated, and then we will resume. But everyone will continue sitting throughout the hearing, so there will be full participation. Before asking the members of the committee to introduce themselves, I would just like to express my sincere appreciation to our Parliamentary Secretariat and support staff, in particular Mr. Brian Caesar, Secretary to the committee, and Ms. Shireen Samuel, Assistant Secretary. And now, may I ask my committee members to please introduce themselves.
General Antwine, member.
Good morning. Wade Mark, member.
Morning, Lester Henry, Vice Chairman of the committee.
Morning, Fazal Karim, member.
Thank you. We have two apologies this morning, Mr. Simonet and Mr. Leonce. And member Critchlow Coburn had to leave, so we are 3 down. But may I now ask participants to introduce themselves? Thank you.
Good morning, Nigel Romano, Chairman of NFM.
Good morning, Kelvin Mahabir, CEO, National Flour Mills.
Good morning, Sati Jagmohan, Corporate Secretary, National Flour Mills.
Good morning, Michelle Durham Kisoon, Acting Permanent Secretary in Ministry of Finance.
Good morning, Frances Signore, Acting Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Trade and Industry.
Thank you all. And we also have in the public gallery members from the National Farmers Association, Rice Farmers Association. All right, well, as you would recall, time is limited, and there's a lot we would like to cover. I'm reminded that there were 2 technocrats in the back row who did not introduce themselves.
Good morning, Sharon Mohammed, Senior Business Analyst, Ministry of Finance.
Good morning, Dennis Scott, Senior Business Analyst, Ministry of Trade and Industry.
Thank you. So, as I was saying, we would like to keep questions and answers focused and as brief as possible so that we can maximize the number of persons who would like to contribute. The purpose of this meeting is to continue the inquiry into the operations of the National Flour Mills with specific reference to the agreement between NFM and the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries for the purchase of rice paddy from local farmers and how that agreement has impacted the ability of the farmers to service their business commitments. The role of this committee is firstly to examine the issues which arose based on NFM and other stakeholders' written and oral responses to the committee's questions. And secondly, to aid NFM in improving its operations, resulting in a more efficient and effective organization. This meeting is being broadcast live on Parliament Channel 11, Parliament Radio 105.5 FM, and the Parliament's YouTube channel ParlView. Viewers and listeners can participate by sending comments relating to today's engagement with the National Flour Mills, the Ministry of Trade and Industry, and the Ministry of Finance via email to parl101@ttparliament.org or on our Facebook page at facebook.com/ttparliament or on Twitter @ttparliament. I now open the floor. Member Karen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. May I join with the chairman and our colleagues here in once again welcoming all of you who have joined us this morning. We are substantially going to be focusing on NFM's operations now. And I want to ask the NFM whether you consider yourself to be a very profitable company. If yes, what would have been responsible for that? And my second part of the question is, what do you see as your challenges, your threats, or your weaknesses to operate financially viable and sustainable in the future?
Very is an adjective, right? And it indicates in relation to something. I would not describe NFM as very or not very. NFM is profitable. Whether we could be more profitable, definitely. So to speak to the other question, if you look at the strategic landscape that is NFM, and you compare us to the competition, you compare us to how other private sector entities operate, I would say that the constraint on our ability to adjust our prices in response to increasing costs is one of the constraints with which we have to operate. Having said that, we as NFM recognize that despite the competition from other producers, we have a responsibility to the people of Trinidad and Tobago to keep a very important staple in their diets affordable. That also has its limitations. So that to the extent that that obligation affects our profitability, we would have to adjust and make decisions that we believe are appropriate and in the best interest of all our stakeholders, including our customers, our employees, and our shareholders.
You had to request of the government of Trinidad and Tobago, or to ask them, certain things or conditions or concessions or whatever adjective you want to describe, as you indicated the word adjective in terms of very. What will those things be that you'll want to make a demand of the government or to ask them or to request of them to assist you in being more profitable?
Well, I'm not in the habit of asking for assistance. We have an obligation to run a profitable enterprise. And quite frankly, we don't really need the permission of the government. However, as I have said, we understand our position in the society. In fact, the competition follows our lead because we are the most important player in the space. Our first obligation is to ensure that we are doing everything in our power to improve our productivity, to improve our efficiency, and thereby to ensure that we maintain margins that will lead to continued profitability. We have had, and we are very focused on, a continuous improvement program where we strive each and every day to do things better. We are looking at the whole job evaluation process and the way NFM is organized to ensure that we continue to operate as efficiently and as profitably as possible. We are also very much focused on working with customers to understand their pain points and where we can continue to add value. And we are working with our leadership team to ensure that they lead the company in partnership with the two unions that represent the staff members to ensure that we maintain sustainable profitability. So I don't want to go asking the government for any help. If I were to ask the government for any input, it would be to not frustrate our attempts to be more profitable, while we understand very clearly our objective and our purpose for how we operate in Trinidad and Tobago.
How will you say that the government, now that you have given us this last line, how does one interpret that you wouldn't want them to frustrate any attempts to be more profitable?
So there is always a healthy tension, and I have no problems with tension or conflict once it's healthy. And the government would like to ensure that we maintain the price of flour at a certain level so that the people of Trinidad and Tobago would not be affected. And as I've said before at this committee, we are here to create value. But unless we capture some of that value in the form of profits, we will not be able to sustain NFM.
So what will you be saying to the government to assist you in doing? And the relation, and that subsequently follows a question. That is the relationship you have with your line minister in ensuring that you get the necessary support and the removal of any idiosyncrasies, if I may use that word, or any tensions that you may wish to eradicate. What are some of these issues that you would like to see? And again, I ask that in the context.
Well, we are constantly making the case for our situation and having ongoing conversations. We recognize the government and any government's objectives, and we are also mindful of NFM's objectives and our, as a board and as a management team, our responsibility to ensure that we have and maintain sustainable operations. And that dialogue continues.
So if I were to ask you to indicate, are you in a sense indicating that if you had your way, I don't want to put words in your mouth, would the price of flour increase?
In fact, it may well decrease. Because, of course, we are operating in a competitive environment. And the reason we would go that route would be to put the competition out of business.
So the NFM has, as it's part of its strategic plan or intent, to decrease the price of flour?
I never said that.
All right. Do you have it on the reverse then, to increase the price of flour?
It depends.
Do you think there's that potential?
There is always the potential.
And do you think that
depends on what happens to the price of the raw material coming into Trinidad and Tobago. It depends on how we manage the risk of a price increase. And it's all fluid. So that, remember, our objective is sustainable operations. Sustainable means profitable operations.
Have you met your profitability target?
We did not meet the target, but we continue to be profitable.
And what would have caused you not to meet the target?
You want to help here?
Yes, a number of things. During the last year in particular, and I'm dealing with 2017 because we have not yet published 2018. We'd have had challenges with foreign exchange during that period, where there were times when we could not get enough foreign exchange to pay for vessels that are arriving into the country, which would incur penalties, demurrage, etc., to get the appropriate foreign exchange so that we can pay, so that the vessels will dock. So they will sit outside in the Gulf and wait until you pay. That has improved in recent times, so that is one factor that is improving. In terms of the price of wheat itself, wheat prices have been fluctuating, and over the last 2 years, we have had increases in the price of wheat. So while, as Mr. Romano said earlier, that we have been improving the performance of the organization from a perspective of continuous improvement, reorganizing, we are now looking at competency levels, et cetera, to ensure that we have the competencies against those jobs that we deem to be relevant in the new strat plan. We also have the negatives of those factors that are sometimes outside of our control that we have to treat with. And therefore, it's a balancing of those two as we move the organization forward.
Thank you. I wonder if you could tell us what are NFM's comparative advantages or disadvantages in meeting the competition?
I would say that in the case of the local competition, because I think recently we are seeing imported flour on some of the shelves. Our comparative advantage, our primary competitive advantage, is our relationship with our major customers. We have very good relationships with the major producers of bread and bread-type products in the country. So, and we continue to maintain those. For me, the major disadvantage would be our inability to really work with the non-flour customer. And I speak here specifically about dog food. I think we can do a much better job relating to the big users, or commercial type users of dog food, the trainers, the security companies, that kind of stuff, and ensure that we really sell the product to them as a good quality product at a much more affordable price. So for me, we need to focus now, and it's part of our strategic plan, to diversify away from the focus on flour through looking at other avenues for producing safe quality food. Because that's the other advantage. We have a very competent, very well-run production facility that, by the end of this year, if not before, we would have that SQF certification, affording us the opportunity of exporting to the major markets. So for me, that is a critical competence that I think we can leverage into other areas of food manufacturing.
One, and then Mr. Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is really a statement that the CEO made just now, when he indicated that one of the among the challenges would have been the difficulty in obtaining foreign exchange to pay for some of your cargo that's coming in. Over the last, you could give us a ballpark figure, about 1, 2, 3 years, if you could give us any indication. What would have been the additional costs, which would have been unforeseen costs, in terms of the cost of quality, if you could describe it in terms of that category? How much money would you have had to expend as a result of the unavailability of Forex to pay, not only for a particular shipment, but for shipment generally of any cargo into NFM over the last 3 years?
I don't have an exact figure for you, but I can describe the areas where we would have had additional costs. As I said, it would have been demurrage, it would have been penalties, it would have been where some of our suppliers would have had to go back on their trade arrangements with us, saying that we can no longer afford to give you credit, etc. There were times when it was very difficult that we had to sometimes forego buying certain types of items and therefore not supply certain products to the market. But as I indicated earlier, that has significantly improved, and now we are in a much better place, and you would see that as when we publish our accounts in 2018, and the line that is called finance charges, you would see that has come down as a result of us doing certain things, both on the financing side and in terms of those operational items related to foreign exchange.
Would you describe it as considerable amount of money that would have been expended that could have had an opportunity cost, as it were, to satisfy other requirements that you could not have?
Well, it would have been an opportunity cost.
Considerable in your view?
Not in respect of the total operations of the business, but it does create constraints for us which we have to work around, and that is something that, you know, we have had to get the management team to look at options as we pursue the areas where we had difficulties at that time to get foreign exchange to do things differently. One of the things that, for example, Mr. Romano said before is the dog food area. So there are times when we would have had to forego purchase of certain raw materials for that and therefore come out of the market for short periods.
Considerably.
It has.
Would you say that it would have been in a couple millions of dollars you may have lost as a result of that?
I wouldn't say couple. What you said, billions or
millions?
Millions. Yeah. Yeah, it would have been a couple million dollars. Yes, it would. Yeah. It would have.
Which would have affected substantially your operating costs.
Yes, it would. Yes.
Thank you.
So let me just finish the talk there. Again, we were in a situation where, like everybody else in the market, faced with the foreign exchange constraints. What we did was raise our hand and say, look, this is a very important enterprise, and as a result of the lack of access to foreign exchange. In other words, we had to join the queue like everybody else. And we had the constraint on prices. One hand can't clap, you know. Let's have a conversation. And the Ministry of Finance recognized that and put arrangements in place to help us to access the foreign exchange. So again, one cannot just sit back and complain. One has to be proactive and have a conversation, recognizing that different parties have different objectives. So,
thank you. Member Mark.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning again to the officials. Mr. Chairman, I would want to agree that the profitability of this enterprise could have been much higher at the net level, and both the shareholder, the people of TNT, owning 51% of NFM, as well as the private shareholders, would have been able to realize greater dividends. But there are some realities that we have to deal with, apart from the foreign exchange crisis that you are faced with, apart from the price or prices that you have to face on the international market for wheat. There are other challenges, and I want to ask you very directly on these matters. Can you tell this committee if you have had challenges in the procurement area of your operations, which might have resulted in losses being realized by the company over the last 3 years? And would you also share with us whether it is your opinion that you have a top-heavy management structure that is weighing heavily on that efficiency level that can realize greater dividends and maybe, as Mr. Romano said, greater levels of, reductions, I should say, in the prices of goods and services that you produce, including flour. I would like to ask either Mr. Romano or the CEO, were any services procured from any board member or members without proper procurement procedures being implemented or followed over the last 3 years? And if so, how would those developments affect or would have affected your operations and your bottom line? Either the CEO or Mr. Romano.
I gather there were lots of questions in there, so can you break them down for us as you go along? Thank you.
So on the question of the top-heavy management, I believe there is room for improvement in terms of the structure, both at the management level and the number of layers of employee across the organization. So right now we have 11 layers. Best in class speaks to 5, and we are actively working to address that.
Any time frame that you would like to share with this committee?
In the not too distant future. I can't be specific as to the time frame.
But you do have a strategic plan.
We have a strategic plan which we'll be approving at the board meeting next week.
And that would be based, obviously, on some new organizational chart that you'll want to derive from that strat plan.
That's correct.
Thank you.
On the question of procurement, there was one instance where at the last AGM, the AGM before the last AGM, certain shareholders had requested to visit NFM. And one of our board members who is very involved in the media area and who had used virtual reality technology offered a solution where at the AGM, we actually filmed the operations, and at the AGM, people were able to put on these virtual reality goggles and virtually walk through NFM. We are also going to use that for training purposes subsequent. We had a little hitch in the way that was approved, and we corrected it. And that is the only instance where a board member, his services were offered, and the cost that we paid for it was so minuscule that it in no way affected the cost of operations. In fact, we believe that it would save us a lot of money in terms of training going forward, and it will be available at every AGM going forward so that shareholders can have a first-hand look at the facility. I can't remember the other questions, I think, if you want to ask them again.
No, I'll come back to it. But could you share with this committee what was the cost, the minuscule cost that you mentioned? That the
75,000 TT dollars.
5,000.
75,000 TT dollars.
Would you tell this committee or share with this committee whether this director of the board breached your procurement rules, any procurement rules, by providing services to the company conscious that this person is the director. Could you tell us if any rules were breached or broken or violated?
I do not believe any rules were breached or broken by the director, or because he recused himself from the approval, and he was the only person that we knew of at the time who could provide the service, which in fact we believe saved us a lot of money.
So you are saying in Trinidad and Tobago, there is no one else available in the Republic of TNT that could have done a virtual reality tour video for the shareholders outside of this gentleman. Is that what you are telling this committee?
At the time, that's what our belief, and given the cost.
And you're also telling this committee that there was no violation or breach of the rules of the tendering process of the NFM. You're also saying that there was no breach in terms of conflict of interest.
Not from the director. But I will let Sati Jagmohan respond to that.
Hi, good morning. The director did not participate in any decision to use his services. He offered his services to NFM at deeply discounted rates compared to what he would have charged commercially. We were tracking the costs right through to ensure that it was not an exorbitant amount. And we have access to all the materials, which became the property of NFM. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's one area. Could you indicate, as it relates to legal fees, can you indicate whether there were any breaches of your procurement rules as it relates to the payment of legal fees to any individual, any attorney over the last 3 years? Can you share with this committee if any such breaches took place?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not aware of any breaches. As you can see here, we have very limited legal matters, most of which fall into the realm of industrial relations. We have Mr. Courtney McNeish as the industrial relations consultant on our panel, and he's handled most of the industrial relations matter. He's also on retainer by the company to deal with industrial relation matters reaching the courts, as well as to conduct negotiations with the unions on behalf of the company.
Is that all?
The other areas, Ashmead Ali is our corporate attorney, and he would handle matters that are of a corporate nature. The only other matters we have active are matters relating to the explosion of the edible oil complex in 2005, and which 3 persons were terminated as a result. We lost 2 of our employees in that explosion. So the matters are in court, and they would have started many years ago. We are simply trying to conclude the process right now. Thank you.
Did you ever employ one, Dr. Claude Denbo? And could you tell us in what capacity and at what cost? And was that in breach of any procurement rules of the NFM?
Mr. Chairman, Dr. Denbo, we needed to get advice regarding this whole matter of NFM's status, and we added Dr. Denbo. It was a board decision to add Dr. Denbo to our panel of attorneys. Can we provide the costs in a written submission, because I don't know the amount offhand.
All right, yes, I have no problem, through Chair. Mr. Chairman, I also like to deal with the issue. Do you know of a company called RM Engineering that was employed by the NFM to provide design works And could you tell us whether the works were satisfactory, the delivery of the works in terms of the designs were satisfactory to the NFM? And could you share with this committee, if they were not, whether any costs would have been recovered? And could you tell this committee what was the payment made to this company called RM Engineering?
Yes, RM Engineering was engaged to do a particular project which had to do with the design of our operating hub at Carson Field, which included new warehousing facilities, etc. The design was done, and we had gotten to the tendering stages. When the costs came in terms of the design, they were on the very high side in terms of the amount of work to be done to provide those facilities. Now remember that what NFM in its trust to become SQF compliant is doing is putting down structures that meet and exceed the normal both food quality and food safety standards. What we have had to do is to go back now and do something called value engineering to look at what is going to be required to bring in the costs in line with something that is going to be a bit more competitive and affordable for us. Because at the end of the day, while it might be the best designed or the best facility, it has to be commercially viable for us to want to move it forward. So we had to go back and look at it. And that's on a particular Carson Field site where it is located north of the rice mill operations.
Yeah, but could you tell this committee what was the cost of this exercise? And having regard to what you have just said, were you able to recover any costs having regard to certain defects that you would have discovered at the material time? Could you share with this committee?
Well, the cost is written in the submission at $635,000. And as I indicated, it is not that the design is bad, it's that the design has to be reworked so that it could be more cost competitive.
So we paid $635,000 for a design that has to be reworked. Is that what we are being told?
Well, it is part of what you have to do in a building of that size. You must do a design that meets all the approvals in terms of statutory approvals, and then ensure so that it meets the commercial requirements.
Let me just ask another final question here before I pause to return. Could you tell this committee whether in the last 3 years NFM has been engaged in any loans as working capital? And if you have been, could you indicate to us the value of those loans and to whom you would have accessed those loans from in terms of working capital for the NFM?
Yes, we have had loans with a number of institutions, including Republic Bank, the Exim Bank, and NCB Global, I think it's.
Would you want to share with this committee? I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Would you like to give this committee a breakdown of the loans that were acquired under these three companies over the last 3 years?
I'm just checking our financials here. Yep. Exim Bank has, at 2017, had a facility of $3 million on the book. NCB Global, $9 million. and Republic Bank, the equivalent of $38,914,000.
When were these loans taken out?
The Exim Bank is an ongoing arrangement where it rejuvenates itself every 6 months based on the requirements of the organization. Republic Bank is a 5-year facility. I don't have the exact date, but I think it would have been somewhere around 2014 or early 2015. And NCB would have been, I think, in 2017, and that was part of also a requirement to get foreign exchange at that point in time, because that's a US dollar-based loan.
Mr. Chairman, I've raised these questions in the public interest to ask the chairman through you whether he can tell us whether NCB Global Finance has a 25 to 30% shareholding of JMMB, and whether the chairman of NFM is not the CEO of JMMB. That is what I'm trying to clarify here.
My name is Nigel Romano. I'm the CEO of JMMB Bank, Trinidad and Tobago Limited. NCB no longer has any shareholding in the JMMB Bank.
Could you tell us when that took place? Before the loan or after the loan?
One has nothing to do with the other. If you are trying to imply that as chairman of NFM, I was influenced by the relationship between NCB and the JMMB group, I take serious offense to that.
No,
I have not influenced in any way, shape, or form the relationship between NCB and the NFM.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I have not accused anyone of anything.
You are implying an implication that I take serious objection to.
Mr. Romano, your answer is noted, and I think we will leave it at that. I appreciate the clarification made, and it's now on the record. I have a couple of questions, if I may.
Okay.
How old is the plant at Ryson Road?
Is the plant? Yes. Well, there are a number of plants on the Ryson Road facility. The flour mill was constructed around 2006 and commissioned then, when there's a fairly new modern facility. We have a number of dry mix lines, which vary between 25 years to maybe 15 years old. And then we have the feed milling operation, which comprises the base feed mill, which is in the 25-year age. And then we have newer pieces of equipment where we would have upgraded packing facilities and so on over the years, so that in certain parts we will have robotics that are handling certain aspects of the operation. But you also have older equipment, which, as Mr. Romano indicated earlier, part of what we want to do in the future is look at how we utilize technology to improve the performance of the organization.
Now, the silos that you see when you drive past on Ryson Road, what are the purpose of those silos?
Okay. Those silos would normally be used to store wheat, corn. When the vessels come in, the vessels will discharge, the cargo is weighed and then discharged into those silos. And during operation, our systems would automatically draw from the silo for the requirements of production.
Now, how old are those silos?
The silos were built at different times. Some of them would have been built with the first plant, which would have been 45 years thereabouts. And then the newer ones would have been built at the time that the flour mill was built in 2006, the new flour mill.
Do silos have a life?
Generally, you have silos that could last 100 years. They have been designed to be very long-lasting. They are, of course, tested every year in terms of inspections and so on to make sure that there are no cracks or leaks. Post the earthquake last year, we had to do a survey again, and we constantly do that because, you know, we are in an area that was previously a landfill operation where it was reclaimed, I suspected, many years ago, and therefore the water table is quite high, and we have to keep managing that.
Yeah, because you mentioned that you need to have structures that meet or exceed food safety standards. Yeah. And my understanding that a lot of silos typically have a life between 7 and 15 years. And so I'm comforted to hear you say that you do regular inspections and maintenance. So what? Would that be to deal with things like temperature, insect activity, and so on? Could you elaborate?
Yeah, the inspections are done in terms of the integrity of the structure itself. So, for example, besides the actual concrete work, we have steel work that would be part of the elevator system to move the grain around, part of the bridge structure that goes from the new flour mill to the silos. So you would see a long span of bridge. So we have to inspect that to ensure that there is no mechanical failures around the joints. And again, there are certain parts of the silos that are below ground level that you have to inspect to make sure that there's no water intrusion, nothing is changing that would compromise the silos.
Based on your most recent inspection reports, you would say that the silos and the plant are up to safety standards?
Yes, there are minor cracks and so on, which you always find every time you go into an inspection, but nothing that is different from the norm.
Thank you. Member Henry.
I'd just like the person from the representative from the Ministry of Finance update the committee on the status of the divestment of the Cassenfield rice mill. Any new information?
Through you, Chair. On the last occasion I was here, I would have said that negotiations had commenced. I believe the timeline I had stated was a bit erroneous. The negotiations committee had in November submitted in August had submitted its evaluation report. That is August 2017. In November 2017, the government established a negotiating team, and there was a preferred bidder, and the meetings with the preferred bidder started in March 2018. As of today, we had requested some additional information on the financing of a parboil facility from the preferred bidder, and we are awaiting a response to close the negotiations.
Yeah.
Good morning. My question is to the Ministry, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Trade and Industry. In your strategic plan 2016 to 2020, was stated that the ministry's support is extended to all sectors through various initiatives, including agriculture and agro-processing. Are there any initiatives that specifically target the rice industry in Trinidad and Tobago?
Thank you very much, Member, and through you, Chair. The Ministry of Trade and Industry's strategic plan is an overarching one. There is support to the different areas, but not necessarily directly. For example, if one is to look at some of the incentives that, I should say rather the initiatives, a couple of the initiatives that the Ministry of Trade and Industry is actually advancing, such as the Research and Development Facility, where one is encouraged to provide information on areas that are being developed for export. It could be a number of different areas, and so agriculture, agro-processing could fit into that facility. And that is one where persons or producers are encouraged, if there is a focus on innovation and exports. It is perhaps, as I say, not necessarily directly, but one that can apply to a number of different sectors. So that, again, just to go back, the strategic plan focuses on the need to expand non-energy exports, and the MTI will try at every opportunity to lend support to those areas.
In your opinion, in opinion of the ministry, in respect of the local rice industry, if the facility to deal with parboiled rice is brought on stream, do you see this as a feasible agricultural objective of Trinidad and Tobago in terms of the production of parboiled rice?
From the feedback that we've received, parboiled rice is one of the products that the population gravitates towards. And if that is in fact the case and it is meeting a need, then it is something that we see as being a very important aspect, and especially if it gives others an opportunity to explore their areas of focus and their expertise in this area. It would be a win-win at the end of the day, and we see that there would be benefit to the population if that is explored through an investor. Hence the reason for the current process to bring to conclusion the negotiations with the preferred bidder.
And to the Ministry of Finance, how far forward are we in terms of this investment and divestment in terms of the rice industry?
As I indicated a few minutes ago, we are waiting for the preferred bidder to come back to us on the financing of this parboil facility. There were some sticking points, and I believe that most of the sticking points have been clarified. I need to come back to you on whether the issue of the land, the lease of the land, has been sorted out. But barring those two factors, negotiations, I hope, could conclude within the next 3 months.
I understand that the Minister of Agriculture is here, so I'm going to take one more question from Member Henry, and then we will take a short break.
Mr. Chairman, just to clarify the issue of NFM's status as not being a public company, publicly owned company, in light of the TSTT judgment, how does that cause you to revise your position, or not?
We have been informed by legal counsel that the established authority on this matter is the judgment of Mr. Justice Devines in the Cellular Planet case. We can provide a copy for your consideration. We have also been advised that in the very same case, Ravi Balgobin Maraj versus TSTT, Mr. Justice Harris wrote a judgment on the 7th of July 2017 in which he followed the adopted the Cellular Planet case. Subsequently, on December 4th, he changed his mind and wrote another judgment. In any event, the latter decision is under appeal to the Court of Appeals so that it may pronounce definitively on this matter. While we cannot guarantee the outcome, it is our opinion, based on the advice of legal counsel, that the Cellular Planet case is likely to prevail. So we are not changing our mind at this point in time. Thank you.
All right, and just to put on the record that I am aware that the matter did go up to the Court of Appeal, and then it halted, and the Court of Appeal did put out a press release basically saying that it's not a settled question, and I suppose at some point it's going to get up there for a definitive answer. So we thank you for that. Now, so thank you very much, participants. We will take a short break now to accommodate the ministers joining us. You're welcome to stay because in the event the minister says certain things that you may wish to ask or comment upon, your presence would be appreciated. So thank you. Take a break. So good morning again. And we are very pleased to be able to welcome the Honorable Minister of Agriculture, Senator Clarence Rambarat. Senator, you had written to us indicating that you would like to appear before our committee today on the inquiry into the operations of the National Flour Mills. So we are delighted to have you, and please give us your statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I've been following the proceedings, as you know. I'm happy to be here to lend my voice and maybe provide some clarification on what you've already heard. In my opening, I want to say two things. The first is that in 1995, when I was in private practice, the firm I worked with represented NFM as external counsel, and I have, from that period, a very intimate knowledge of the workings of NFM. I want to say that to you. And of particular interest, which I must share with the committee, is the fact that together with Lynette Maraj, senior counsel, and Fayed Hussain, who would eventually be senior counsel, I was involved in that infamous matter relating to the importation of rice in NFM. I was on record then as a solicitor in that matter, so I thought I should say that to you. At the same time, from 1995 to 1998, I was also external counsel for Carney 1975 Limited. And in 1998, November 1998, I joined Carney Limited, and I left Carney and the sugar industry in 2004 as CEO of Carney Limited. During that time, I also was involved in Carney's operation, including its rice operations. The third thing I would say is that I'm from a community that has been involved in rice for a very long time. I still have relatives who are involved in rice in Plomita, so that I have an interest in rice, but I'm also declaring that I have relatives who are involved in the business of rice farming. Thank you.
Well, Minister, was there anything that you had wanted to say in particular about the operations of NFM and the submissions made by the rice farmers?
Yeah, I want to say a few things. The first is to say, having followed the deliberations of the committee so far, having listened to some of the submissions, one of the missing elements in this relates to the numbers and in terms of the decline, and I felt it was important that the committee understood that decline. But before I go there, I'll make an overarching statement in relation to agriculture. There are a lot of people who cannot adjust to the fact that we have existed for some time now in a free market system. We previously existed in a state-driven system with a lot of protectionist measures in place, one of which was the negative list. So there was a period in this country's history when we were able to protect agriculture through the negative list. That opportunity, if it exists only in a very small way. We have opened our markets, and agriculture is one of the areas that has been opened. The second thing I'd make the point is this. People have a difficulty in understanding when this country went aggressively in search of markets for its energy products, it gave up space in the agriculture market. In other words, when we went to potential trading partners and asked them to open their space to our agriculture, to our energy products, we allowed a lot of them, including those in the region, to be able to send their agriculture products to us. And there are people out there, I hear them all the time talking about negative lists, talking about previous ministers who have banned apples and grapes. I've heard people talk about meat, pork, and calling on me to ban it. And I've always said to them, I do not have the tools that other ministers have. The third thing is that there are people who operate on the basis that the government has an endless supply of money and resources. And it is the government's role to support primary production in agriculture, but more importantly, to take supply of primary production from producers. There was a time in this country when we had something, Central Marketing Agency, operating around the country, taking primary supplies from the farmers, paying guaranteed prices, and disposing of it as they felt the need to. A lot of people believe that the government should be a purchaser, the state should be a purchaser of primary production. And it is not a market, it is not an environment that I am prepared to operate in. So I would say, I'd go back to what I said at the start. I've seen and I've heard the figures of 21,700 metric tons a year in relation to production from 1992 and the decline. And I've heard in relation to that references to the exit from in the river swamp as a reason for that. Let me place on the record that the production in 1992 was about 21,200 metric tons. And production in 2015 was 1,893 metric tons. In 1992, Caroni was about to hit its peak in production. Caroni had been heavily invested in rice production. Caroni had two forms of rice production, what is called rain-fed rice and what is called irrigated rice fields. In relation to irrigated lands, Caroni had 2,000 acres under production. And on those lands, Caroni produced 2 crops a year. In relation to rain-fed land, Caroni had 2,247 acres under production. Surprisingly, while Caroni was not an efficient sugar producer, Caroni was an efficient rice producer. And those lands yielded on average every year close to 10,000 metric tons of rice. It means that the production of rice in this country has historically been linked to Caroni 1975 Limited. It left the small rice farmers, and the records show there might have been about 65 of them, to produce on average 9,000 metric tons a year. So when you talk about the decline, you really have to look at a movement of about 9,000 from private farmers about 1992 to a decline to 1,893 using a group of, I think it's about 15 or 16 farmers. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say to you in relation to the production is that the decline in rice, part of it has to do with the fact, if you go to South Trinidad, for example, in the days of Trinidad Island-wide, and I'm surprised actually to see Trinidad Island-wide Rice Growers Association linked to some action outside our ministry a few weeks ago, because that organization has ceased to exist for a long time. But in the days, the heyday of Trinidad Island-wide Rice Growers Association, a significant part of the small farmers came from South Trinidad, Debe, Pinal, and those areas. And if you go down to that part of Trinidad, you would see a lot of that rice land is now in supermarkets and car parts places and used car dealerships, because over a period of time, those persons, private landowners, found that it was more effective to them to use their land for commercial use. And we can't force people to farm. So part of the decline on the private farming of rice has been the disinterest of private farmers and the disinterest of private investors in the cultivation of land. The third thing I would say in relation to what we have now as an industry, and I would say at this time the industry is around 1,300 metric tons, and it is around 3,000 acres of land. As I said before, there are about 16 persons involved in it, and I would say 14 of those are connected in some way to the Akalu family. So the Akalu family is a significant player in the current and the future production of rice in this country. From my data, in Caroni 1975 Limited, Caroni produced, I would say, about 1.1 metric ton of rice per acre. In Guyana, based on the latest information I have out of Guyana, Guyana produces 1.18 metric ton of rice per acre. At this time, using the 2017 figure, I would say we are producing 0.46 metric tons of rice per acre. So if we are to configure, and I would say that we could safely move rice production to 5,000 metric tons a year. But before we talk about moving rice production, there are a few things that we must understand. The first is that we have a guaranteed price for rice paddy in this country. That's the first thing. Rice remains among the few commodities, rice and cocoa, where we have a guaranteed price for it. In other words, the market is not buying rice at the price that the farmers are being paid. It is uncompetitive for them to do so. So what the state has done is the state has guaranteed a price to the purchaser of the paddy. And at this time, that purchaser is National Flour Mills. So that if we are to increase production, it comes at a cost to the taxpayer. And I will give you those numbers. So I would say we can safely go to 5,000 metric tons. And what that would mean is simply two things. It means becoming more efficient in the 3,000 acres that we currently cultivate. The rice farmers are behind me. They know all the nonsense that is happening in the sector. They know what is happening amongst themselves. And I've called upon them to come together, it's a small group, and to understand the numbers, and to talk to me as a minister on the basis of numbers and not on the basis of foolishness, so that if they wish to get to 5,000 metric tons, they can focus on the efficiency of their production, the quality of their work, and set out to achieve at least what Guyana is doing, 1.18 metric ton per acre. And that would take them close to 3,895 tons in production. The second thing is that to get to 5,000 metric tons, they would need an additional 1,200 acres of land. And if they farm that additional acreage and yield 1.18 metric ton per acre, that would bring them up to the 5,000. The combination of being more efficient on the current acreage and the introduction of 1,200 new acres would bring us to 5,000 metric tons. And as a minister, I'm quite prepared to support the farmers with an additional 1,200 acres to do that. Every minister sets these targets, 50% reduction in food import bill, 40% increase in this. Well, I'm a minister that deals in numbers. My predecessors have said, for example, that they wish to have local rice on the market. They wish to have 50% of our needs. Well, we import at this time 36,000 tons of parboiled rice. That is what the market wants. We cannot shove white rice down people's throat. The market wants parboiled rice. There is no parboiling plant in this country, and I'll come to that. So if we aim to fill that market of 36,000 with 18,000 metric tons, we could work the numbers and you would see what it requires us to do in terms of land, in terms of water, in terms of fertilizer, in terms of labor. We'll see that. But I'll tell you what it will take us to get to 10,000 tons. If we get to 5,000 tons, and we then need to get to a further 5,000 tons to reach 10, we would need an additional 5,800 acres. But more importantly, based on the guaranteed price of paddy in this country, we would need to put out another $56 million a year to buy the paddy from the farmers. And my question is, are taxpayers prepared to pay? This is for 10,000 metric tons. Are the taxpayers prepared to pay $112 million to the rice farmers? That is the first question. And is the Parliament prepared to allocate that money to me? And that is only on the paddy. I've not spoken about the land. Rice consumes a lot of water. The fertilizer, the support on the grains, the support on the inputs. Are we prepared as a country to do that? And that is the configuration. That is the matter I want to, I've longed for a discussion with the rice farmers. Let me talk about this issue with National Flour Mills. I'm sorry. NFM happens to be the only company in this country that could handle that tonnage of rice. The other millers we have, the few other millers we have are very, very small in production. The biggest of them now is Island Grain, but Island Grain is only of recent vintage. The other ones are very small and they are not able to handle. So when we had a need for someone to take over the Carlson Field Mill, it is an NFM that was entrusted with that responsibility. And over the years, NFM has, and I listen to them and I agree with them in part, a lot of times they have been very unwilling on this exercise. In fact, there have been several attempts to divest the Carlson Field Mill by NFM. And every time NFM has tried to divest that asset, it has to face this issue of who will mill the rice for the rice farmers. It has had to face the issue of what arrangements have been made for the rice farmers. And there were a lot of protests over the years. In fact, the rice farmers will tell you that. They would tell you that rice was dumped outside the Carlson Field Mill. The Carlson Field Mill was shut down for a long time, and simply because NFM had no interest in it. And one of the things that shocked me, Chairman, in listening to the recent deliberations, when I came in as minister, I made it clear to the rice farmers in this country, I am not prepared to use taxpayers' funds to take rice and give it to dogs. When you talk about food security, and I'm not sold on that argument that we should put the whole country at risk because we wish to grow rice in every nook and cranny of this country. But I accept there is a valid argument that we should be able to provide a portion of our carbohydrate needs. And I support a component of our rice being local rice. But I'm sure you would have been surprised to hear NFM say recently 95% of the rice purchased from local rice farmers goes into PET. So could you imagine that the taxpayers of this country support rice by providing sometimes the seeds that are required, support rice by making the water that is required available, support rice by making the land that is available, support rice by guaranteeing a fixed price, support rice by paying NFM $4.8 million a year to mill that rice. And the taxpayers that I represent in this country finding out that that rice does not end up on their plates, but ends up in the kennels around the country. That is something that has me very, very concerned. Because I was very clear to the rice farmers, and I was very clear to NFM, that if taxpayers have to be in this business of rice, it must be to put rice on the plates for human consumption. In February 26, 2016, that is 5 months after my appointment, I was able to meet with the rice farmers and put to them a proposal where I would support them in the establishment of their own mill. I would support them in ensuring that the government maintains the price, the guaranteed price. I would support them in ensuring that we provide support on the seeds and some of the other things that they need, including land. But I also said to them that they need to come together and organize themselves as a business. And they cannot operate on the basis that in the dry season we face noise about water, in the wet season we face noise about claims, and we have all this sort of actions going on that we need order. We need order because the taxpayers are putting a lot of money behind them.
Thank you, Minister. Before I open the floor, I just have a couple of questions. Based on what you've said, I'm wondering if the current arrangement, the current model, whereby NFM and the Ministry of Agriculture buys the rice paddy, is a sustainable and cost-effective model. And if not,
it is not, Chairman.
It is not. And so the follow-up question to that would be, well, what's a viable alternative? What should the ministry be doing?
I would tell you what has taken place so far. When I came in as minister, I met yet another attempt to divest the Carlson Field Mill. And the problem with that attempt, there are two problems with it. One is that the request for proposals went out from the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries. And I was shocked to find out that a ministry will seek to divest an asset that belongs to a publicly listed company. That was my problem. And I said to NFM, you are supposed to be divesting your own asset. The ministry has no role in that. And that process was abandoned and replaced by the current effort to divest the mill. Second thing is that I have no business in, and I have nothing to do with NFM's business. NFM provides a service for me on behalf of the farmers. But I have no reason to interfere. If they want to divest themselves of their asset, then I cannot interfere with that. But I know of the problems of the past. So that is why my discussions with the rice farmers have been around a mill. We need a mill to be able to mill your rice. And in February 2016, I was promised a proposal. The funny thing is that I got that proposal towards the end of January 2019, and that proposal is under consideration. The second thing is that I did in fact intervene eventually in this NFM attempt to divest the Carlson Field Mill. And I did intervene to say that what this country needs is a parboiling plant. I have no doubt about that. But to have a parboiling plant, you must have rice to put through the plant. And we don't have that capacity. We are not going to produce that amount. But the divestment of the mill has produced persons who apparently are interested in having a parboiling plant. And I believe that what we should be trying to do in this country is not to convert Carlsonfield into a parboiling plant. That is a manifestly unworkable proposition. It is onerous in terms of cost. It is not fair to NFM, and it is not fair to somebody who wants to set up that parboiling plant. So the government is interested. We've recently received a proposal that we are considering, and we wish to advance in having a parboiling plant in this country, which is not linked to the local rice farmers. If the local rice farmers do in fact wish to sell to that plant eventually, that is a possibility. So that's the first thing. I believe that we should not be linking the parboiling plant to NFM's Carlsonfield facility, and the government has already moved to take into consideration the interest in establishing a parboiling plant. And all that will need of us as a state is to make the land available at the cost that we'd make land available to any agro-processor in the country. The second thing is that the rice farmers need to understand what type of industry the government wish to support in terms of the level of production, what we are prepared to pay in terms of the support, and what we are prepared to do with that rice. If local rice production increases and that rice could become parboiled rice, we will have a market for it. And if local production increases and the rice remains white rice, we would have to create a market for it locally. So that is where I see us going, and that is where we should go. We should configure a market for the local rice where we could sustain the support and where we'll find buyers for the product. If we get a parboiling plant, it would make it easier to supply that plant with local paddy and imported paddy. And if we set up a parboiling plant that is not a conversion of Carlsonfield mill, we would leave NFM with an asset that as a publicly listed company it could dispose in the manner it wishes to dispose.
Thank you. Member Karen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Honorable Minister, let me welcome you to our conversation this morning. This is the third session we are having with respect to the inquiry into rice paddy, and it involves NFM, your ministry, and the local rice producers. And throughout these conversations, we have been hearing about parboiling facility, and I think you just reiterated the point I made. You could have a parboiling facility that can't boil anything, so you don't have the ingredient, the input. Give me your experience of the past with Caroni 1975 Limited, which I am very much aware. Even going back to Caroni when you were there, and then transferring or transforming to where you just entered this domain in 23 years ago, why was it not possible to have this discussion come to reality for so long in having a facility that we know would only exist to assist not only productivity and production of rice, but local domestic production and the food. And in that context, I have a number of questions, but I know the time is, but that's the first question. The second thing is, given what you have said and your comparison with Guyana and so on, which I am also very much aware, I don't know if you would have made any confirmations of providing seed from Guyana to the farmers, and whether that was in fact delivered. But the both questions so far will underlie this first important question. You may have given us snippets of a plan for rice in Trinidad and Tobago. But the question I want to hear from you, the answer is, do you have a plan for rice, paddy production milling, parboiling in this country? And if so, is there a written plan and policies to take this industry further? Is there a future, in your view, for this industry?
Okay, thank you very much. In relation to your first question, well, it has to do with the absence of a parboiling plant. I mean, I could offer many reasons for that. And the simple fact is maybe sometimes you just don't have the political will, you don't have the political support, or you don't have the private sector interest. In relation to Caroni or any other private investor, a parboiling plant 5 years ago would have been a far more formidable investment than it is now. If you go to Guyana, you would see recently some new parboiling plants that take up less than half acre and that can be installed maybe in the range of 6 million TT, 6 to 9 million TT. So it has to do with ease of doing business, the ability to get plants now from places like India, the cheaper cost of production, and the ability of people in primary producers like rice farmers to have access to capital to make that investment. But it is possible, and I have seen it in Guyana.
So that you have a plan as the minister responsible for food production, lands, agriculture, and fisheries, and so on. Are you telling us and telling the country that you do have a plan for the future sustainability of rice production?
Yeah, well, I'm coming, that is your third question. The second question you asked me about was seed. The rice farmers are sitting behind me. They know. In October, when I visited them after the flooding, I made a call to the president of the rice board in Guyana, who I met on a trip before, and they spoke to the president because I wasn't able to speak to him about varieties and so on. And I spoke to him, and they spoke to them. And as I say, part of the problem I encounter as a minister is the fact that there are a lot of people who like to talk, but in the public, as a public official, you have to write. If you require the taxpayers' support on something, if you require support, you can't tell me on the phone. You have to write. And if I introduce you to somebody and I give you information and you require further support, you could send me a message on Facebook. You could send me, I'm an accessible minister. So I have not heard from the rice farmers since then, but I am the one who introduced them to the president. And they know that if I need to intervene, whenever I have to intervene, I will. But a minister cannot run the affairs of private investors, and the rice farmers and farmers are private investors. And the third thing in relation to your question about a plan, yes, farmers are familiar. They have seen it. The rice plan in the ministry that I met is about 86 pages long. The rice plan that I have is on one sheet of paper. They have seen it. They have seen the numbers and they've seen it. I've shared it with them. I just shared it with you. There are people who believe that a plan must be something that is thick, bound, and with a lot of pages and photos and so on. I just articulated the plan, and I just articulated what I'm prepared to do as a minister. Because the Vision 2020 agriculture component was 168 pages or something like that. And I can't. Everything that has to be done, I've said it as a minister, everything that has to be done about agriculture has been written of already. My job is to implement it. But I could only work with in other words, I can't force the farmers to plant. I need them to tell me what they have the resources to do. If I say to you, I'm going to make 1,200 acres available, can you manage 1,200 acres? Do we need additional farmers? Where this land is going to be? Do I have to find the land? Are the farmers in Plomita? Are they in southwest Trinidad? Where are the farmers? Where are they prepared to farm? How much are they prepared to farm? What is the cost of doing it, and what support I have to give you?
Sam, can I ask whether you think there is an issue in terms of this relationship with the rice farmers?
I don't think so. I have the Akalu family. I started out by saying 14 out of the 16 are Akalus. They know me well.
When last have you met with the Rice Farmers Association?
There's no Rice Farmers Association.
When last have you met with the group of rice producers?
I have met with the Akalu family on several occasions. In fact, in the last In the last month, I've met with the Island Grain. I've been back and forth with them. I've been talking to the rice farmers. They have no problem. But I will say this to you. Across agriculture and across this country, you have these groups that pop up, and you have these middlemen and brokers that appear out of nowhere. So I don't know about I know about something called the Caribbean Rice Association of Trinidad and Tobago. I'll tell you how I know about them. They have a parcel of land that is supposed to be under rice. They don't exist. In April 2016, a notice was published in the Gazette declaring that they no longer exist. But they are supposed to be farming substantial acreage of rice land. And when I say 1,200 acres could be made available, well, we have 12, they call it the crat lands. There are farmers in the back there who are occupying sections of the crat lands. So there's an association popping. I told you, I read in the newspaper was Turga, Trinidad Island White Rice Farmers was outside the building of the ministry. Well, I know the founders, I know the people involved in Turga, they're no longer involved in rice. So to say, ask if I met with this association or that association, I have not met recently. They've not asked to meet with me, but I have been meeting rice farmers all the time. I have rice farmers from Plumita, from all over who contact me.
Would you say that the rice industry is being jeopardized by a cartel?
I wouldn't, a cartel of politicians for sure. A cartel of politicians, because as minister I've seen a protest organized by one predecessor, Mr. Bharat. I've seen a protest organized by a second predecessor, Mr. Maraj. And rice is, in a sense, rice is easy picking. People have an emotional attachment to it. When it's dry season, they say, Minister ain't giving the rice farmers water. When it's flood, they say, Minister have the land flooded out. I mean, they're emotional things, but this is a business. What I just laid out to you, if you want 10,000 metric tons of paddy produced in this country, I just said to you, you have to be prepared to fork out $56 million. That it is not, the rice farmers and farmers in this country do not have a problem dealing with me. But I bring an understanding of agriculture, an experience in agriculture, an expertise in land, but I also have to understand that when one is given an allocation by the parliament, you can only do what you can do.
I think the chairman wants to ask and then I'll come. One more, okay, right, yeah. I wanted to ask, you spoke about the provision of seeds and so on for planting. Well, in spite of the fact that they were promised seeds, or whatever, through whatever mechanism they were promised these seeds, why did we have the abandonment, as it were, of the El Carmen seed project? And if so, why?
Remember, there have been a lot of stops and starts and abandonments in the ministry, as with all ministries. The El Carmen seed project, what I know about it, there's a gentleman sitting in the back of me called Richard Singh. Richard Singh at some point took control of that acreage, along with other acreages in the ministry. And whether the El Carmen unit was abandoned 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I don't know. I met it in an abandoned shape. But I do know that the rice that the seeds that the farmers need can be imported. The opportunity to import it exists. Since I've been minister, they have had imported seeds. In fact, I had to intervene when the seeds were growing out of the containers on the port, and nobody was making attempts to release it and distribute it. So the issue of seed, you don't require a seed unit in a ministry in 2019 to be able to access seed. What you need to determine is what variety you want, where it is available, and what are the means to make it available to the farmers here.
Member Mark.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, member.
You inform this committee whether the consistent or consistently late payments by the Ministry of Agriculture to the NFM as we were told in evidence here, may have contributed to the challenges currently faced by the rice industry and by farmers, particularly those who have had to meet exorbitant interest payments via loans through the ADB. Would you indicate whether your ministry has contributed to this situation in any way?
The answer is yes. There have been late payments consistently for several years. In fact, Member Mark, I don't know if you are aware, in 2014, a note had to be taken because the arrears for farmers had reached $48 million, and that's 2014. For close to 3 years, farmers had not been paid. When I came in as minister in September 2015, I met arrears for a year and a half. I answered several questions in the parliament, and eventually I was able to clear those arrears. And over the last 3 years, as I answered in a motion that you brought to the parliament, I said I've progressively managed to reduce the time lag to the point that the farmers who made claims for the period October-November 2018 were paid on January 10th, 2019. It means that I've brought it down now to 6 weeks. But there's another thing that has happened since I've been minister. Every time I've heard about delays in payment, and I'll explain the delays just now, every time I've intervened, I've placed a call to the chairman of ADB. Whether it is because of late payment, non-payment, or flood issues, I always make a call to the chairman of ADB to ask that ADB gives the farmers a moratorium. Now, the payment issue is linked to two factors. The first is that, it may surprise you to know, that there are farmers complaining about late payments on ADB loans, but their payment from NFM is not linked to the loan. In other words, they have not assigned their payment from NFM to ADB. But they've been out there talking about late payment and loan not being paid. And I'm on record in the country, and I'll repeat it today, that Richard Singh, who sits behind me, is one of those farmers. All while Richard Singh was in the newspaper talking about late payment from NFM and his loan was not assigned to ADB. But there are times when, and the process is that ADB has to first sell the rice before making a claim to the ministry for the subsidy. NFM has to sell the rice. And to overcome that, we have to come up. But if we have an organized group of farmers to whom we can make an advance payment, that would be possible. But when you're dealing with 16 disparate individuals and trying to manage them, it is very difficult. And you're dealing with taxpayers' funds, you're dealing with the comptroller accounts, the auditor general, and questions that may be asked. And in Richard Singh's case in particular, I said it in the parliament, and I'll say it here today. Mr. Singh knows that when he took that loan from ADB that is now being called a loan for rice farming, when he took that $4 million loan, it was not for rice farming. It was on the promise of one of my predecessor ministers that he would get contracts to do land preparation because the ministry planned to expand rice farming. And Mr. Singh, through no fault of his, took a letter written by a permanent secretary, something I have never seen in my time in public life, a permanent secretary of a ministry writing to the bank ADB saying that you should give Mr. Singh a loan for $4 million because we intend to give him a contract to do land preparation. And when I came in as minister, Mr. Singh had not made a payment to that loan because no work was given to him. And I could not give him the work. And Mr. Singh will tell you that under my time as minister, he has gotten more payments from rice than he's ever gotten in the past. And more recently, that loan was restructured to allow him to make payments. He'd make his payments later this year. And for that loan to be more manageable. And for the first time, his payments from NFM is now assigned to the ADB to pay those loans. And that is the truth.
Given the appeal that you have made to the ADB, whenever there are late payments, could you share with this committee, outside of Mr. Singh, how many other farmers might have benefited from your appeal to the ADB for a moratorium, or did ADB listen or not listen to you as it relates to the moratorium plea that you would have made?
Member Mark, that is information, I have to be very careful because that is information that I could make available to the ADB. ADB appeared before this committee. I could make that available. And if you want, I could make that information available.
All right. I just want to ask as well, you made reference to the Trinidad and Tobago Rice Industry Development Plan. Now, this plan, has it been approved by the Ministry of Agriculture? And if it has been approved, has there been any implementation or revision, or have we withdrawn this plan as it relates to the rice industry? Could you share with this committee?
The answer is no. That plan, at least I have not approved that plan. I read the plan. It is unimplementable and unworkable and unrealistic. And what I articulated earlier are the elements of a plan that I believe it is realistic once the farmers are prepared to move in that direction.
Now, I understand you had what is called a rice unit that was supposed to do, among other things, produce seeds for the rice farmers. I further understand that this rice unit was decommissioned. Could you share with us, if that is so, what was the reasons for the decommissioning of the rice unit?
When I was appointed in September 2015, I did not meet a rice unit in the ministry. I'm not aware that one was decommissioned since September 2015, and I am not aware that we need to be producing rice seeds in the ministry. No, I'm saying when I was appointed in September 2015, I did not meet a rice unit in the ministry.
Yeah. But are you aware of the existence of a rice unit anywhere within the ministry prior to your
In response to Member Karim, I said there was something up at El Carmen. I don't know if it is a rice unit, but there was something I saw at El Carmen, a facility, an open area, covered area, but the sides open with some bags of seeds that appeared to me to be there for several years. That is as much as I know.
Do you think there's a calculated effort by certain interest groups to discontinue the rice industry in Trinidad and Tobago, apart from the politicians you mentioned, which I take that in banter, as banter. But let's deal with serious matters now. I'm asking the question whether there's a deliberate policy, either on the part of the government or by certain interest group in collaboration with the government or separate from the government, to dispose of the rice industry in TNT so that we can become a sole importer of rice, and thereby impacting negatively in whatever way as it relates to our own food security. Could you share with us?
I don't think so at all. As a matter of fact, I have right in front of me Nariva Farms. The largest acreage under cultivation is Nariva Farms. I am shocked that prior to my entry into this ministry, no attempts were made to renew the lease for Nariva Farms or any rice farmer in this country. Because you can't run a business if you don't have security of tenure. So that, one, the government is committed. I just spoke about the CRAT lands. The government is committed to give the rice farmers the tenure that they require. I've just said that we're prepared to put additional acreage in that central area in Kelly Village and that area in Plumita and wherever else interested farmers exist. The government has not capped its support in terms of the guaranteed price for paddy. So in other words, we have not created a 1,300 metric ton industry. Whatever the rice farmers produce, the government, through the current arrangement with NFM, will support. And I've also said that the government has indicated its support for the establishment of a parboiling plant, which will require the feedstock in order to operate. And we recognize that not all will come from Trinidad, but some will come from Trinidad, and the opportunity exists. And I don't think that 1,395 metric tons of white rice will cause anybody in this country to be unhappy. I think every government has been committed to a percentage of our carbohydrate coming from local white rice.
Do you think that there's a link, an inextricable link, between the establishment of a rice unit, whatever shape, whatever form, wherever located, and the successful divestment of the Castle Field rice mill? And if there's a disconnect, then that Castle Field mill, as it relates to successfully divesting same, is going to fail and flop if there is not a concomitant establishment of a rice unit in Trinidad and Tobago?
Member Mark, with the greatest of respect, I've said it already. The continued success of rice farmers is dependent on two things happening. One, a place to mill their rice. And clearly, NFM has indicated it is not interested in doing that business. And I could understand. So that is why I've said there's an interest in having a miller. I have already given instructions. In fact, tomorrow there's a meeting with NFM. I've already given the instructions that an RFP be put out so that anybody in Trinidad and Tobago who is willing to offer the services of a rice miller to local rice farmers can put in a proposal which would be examined. The fact that we support the parboiling plant means that we have an interest in finding something else for the local paddy and not just white rice. And I've already said, there is it has been a red herring. This link between Carlson Field, a 40-year-old, that mill is 40 years old. That mill, there have been more modern facilities. And Carlson Field gives you a mill-to-mill paddy into white rice. Carlson Field is not a parboiling plant. If Carlson Field was a parboiling plant, then my approach would have been different. But what Carlson Field will give you is white rice.
The Minister, we have been told that the grading of the rice, paddy rice, seem to be somewhat confusing, not well uniformed, not well organized. And therefore, when the farmers take their rice to the mill, the bulk of their rice would be put in category, let's say, D, which is the one that you said would end up in the kennel. Are you satisfied, from a ministerial point of view, that the quality assurance system that is in place at Castle Field is one that you are comfortable with?
Senator Mark, you've been in government and you know that the ability of a minister to examine the quality assurance in a company outside his remit is very difficult. But I will tell you this. I accept that because, in fairness to NFM, because this is not something that is very important to NFM, the farmers, and I know from my own experience long before being a minister, the paddy sits at NFM in Carlson Field, sometimes for long periods unattended, and every hour of wet paddy being piled will affect the quality of the paddy. and will affect the grading of the paddy. But I'll just go back to say one of the reasons why the private farmers, those 65 farmers, why we had the exit of some of them had to do with the introduction of grading in the first place. But grading is important. But grading must be done when the paddy is of the highest quality to be fair to the farmers. And part of that discussion we're having with the technical people at NFM tomorrow is to ensure that the RFP that we put out for a private miller to mill rice for private local farmers will focus on the handling of the paddy from the field to the miller to make sure that it reaches to the miller at a time when the farmer has an advantage in the grading system.
Thank you, Brigadier.
Morning, Mr. Minister. The National Rice Farmers Association is, in its written submission, said that a large farm unit of the Ministry of Agriculture was decommissioned along with all of its support services for reasons unknown to the rice farmers. Could you say why the large farm unit was decommissioned and if there was any consultation with the rice farmers before it discontinued?
Remember, did you say the Rice Farmers Association?
The National Rice Farmers Association.
I'm not familiar with the group. Do you know any of the persons who are involved in that association?
Well, basically, this is submissions from them, so I don't know if the staff have a record of the Rice Farmers Association.
I think Minister was suggesting that is a non-existent.
Well, the one I was talking about was Caribbean Rice Association, Trinidad and Tobago. Turga, I've spoken about Turga. National Rice Association is not one that is new to me, but did someone from the association appear, or do we know?
No, they did a written submission. Yes, no, but the letter to the committee was by Mr. David Papanet, President of the Rice Farmers Association of Trinidad and Tobago.
Well, I will answer your question and I'll make a submission. The first thing, the large farms unit, the large farms, there was somebody in the ministry who was on contract responsible for large farms, and that person's contract expired. And there were two persons on that large farms project. The contracts expired and they were not renewed. There was nothing to destroy. And the reason is simple. I've said to the country that this idea of large farms makes no sense to me. I believe in large farmers, and the focus should be to make our good farmers better. In allocating or advertising these large portions of land to people who may or may not be farmers, you're wasting time. And you should spend your time on renewing leases, granting leases to existing farmers, and helping farmers expand. But I'll tell you, I'll come back to Mr. Papanet. Mr. Papanet, I'm going to be frank with the committee. I've spoken to Mr. Papanet on a few occasions. He once had some ideas about rice farming. And like everybody else, I said, listen, I have to get a written proposal. And that never materialized. I got something from Mr. Papunet about corn. He wanted to get land to supply national flour mills with corn. Well, I spoke about my relationship for national flour mills dating back to 1995. I have a relationship, as Mr. Karim knows, I have a very good relationship with the Poultry Association in the country. I'm very, very familiar with poultry in this country. Poultry farmers are not interested in putting their feed supply at risk by experimenting with local corn to be converted with national flour mills. And I asked national flour mills if they had any interest in doing this, and the answer is no. But I would say that Mr. Papunet approached me sometime in January by text message. And it was very clear to me that Mr. Papunet, in anticipation of an appearance before this committee, was trying to back me into a corner and was demanding from me certain guarantees. You must commit to do these things. And it appeared to me that Mr. Papunet feel that he could appear before this committee and embarrass me in some form unless I gave some sort of undertaking. And I will do no such thing. I will do no such thing. Mr. Papunet is not a farmer. He's not a rice farmer. I've been in this area long enough to know all the people who are here. And I will not be blackmailed by anybody. And I'll make that very, very clear. So that if you have something from the National Life, right, whatever they call themselves, I know nothing about it. I know nothing about that group, and I'm not prepared to deal with Mr. Papunet on behalf of rice farmers and with taxpayers' money. And I've made that very clear. There are a lot of people around this country like that.
Thank you, Minister. We'll be wrapping up shortly, but I wondered, in as much as you're here, whether you could speak on whether government has a policy on food security, and if so, if perhaps you could elaborate.
Chairman, there have been many plans for agriculture. And as Minister, when I came in, I said, our manifesto, in fact, commits to the development of a plan, of a sector plan. And there have been some good plans, and I've identified some of them. There have been some very good plans. And in trying to craft a plan, I have found value in some of the things that have already existed. And our work has been to implement those things that had already existed. In relation to food security, the FAO has advocated a new version of that called nutrition security, which is something that I believe is more achievable. In relation to food security, you're talking about trying to produce on your own, trying to guarantee yourself that you have a supply of food. But to do that, you must have willing partners in the farming community. And you must understand that as you produce, you also have to stand up to what is being imported. So food security, there are certain parts of food security that we should be interested in. One has to do with protein, and that is why we support the local poultry farmers in the way we do. One has to do with carbohydrate, that is why we talk about rice, and we talk about other ways in which we may not be able to produce the primary material, for example, wheat, but we may be able to produce the processing facilities and support the processing facilities so that they would land flour, for example. They'll continue to land flour on the tables at a price that is competitive and is affordable. In relation to nutrition security, that is an even more important aspiration. A lot of people believe that local means good. A lot of people go to the market and they purchase because their parents have been purchasing that way. And we have an obligation in relation to the work that is being done on NCDs to focus our citizens on consumption and consumption of things and in quantities that will ensure their long-term health. And that is the approach. Before the end of the year, before the end of the fiscal year, we will publish our plan, and it's a plan that draws on a lot of what existed, but it focuses on how we implement what we do. Thank you.
So before I ask you to make your closing submissions, one other question. Can you say something about, from your perspective, the challenges facing the agricultural sector?
Number one is land tenure. I am not going to shift from that point. And I'll tell you this story. Yesterday evening, we had the National Cocoa Awards. I think even though I had my doubts about it, it was an amazing event, and I was very pleased to see that we could produce in this country something of that caliber that will feed into the international awards. The 5 best cocoa farmers identified last night, identified on the basis of the quality of their beans, judged by a panel which was local and international. Those beans would be submitted to the international competition, where we've been winning awards every year. A young man from Leroy Peters from Grand Riviere, his wife is Gita, she's from Amoral. He won the award for his 12-acre farm in Grand Riviere. And it was just as I was exiting the building, having spent about 2 or 3 hours there, that they grabbed me by my shirt and said to me, "Mister, one thing we had to talk to you about." And I was shocked. 18 years now they've been waiting for the renewal of their lease of their plot in Grand Riviere. They have no water and they have no electricity. And that is why I say tenure is number one. We have some outstanding farmers in this country, many of them sitting right behind me there. We have some great farming families. We could do what we need to do, but you cannot ask people to invest their lives on a plot of land with the uncertainty of not having tenure. And that is why I have said I could build bridges and I could build roads and I could write law and I could craft policy. But the number one thing I will do for the farmers of this country is to ensure that they have land tenure.
Mr. Karam, you have the last question.
Let's see which one of the last ones I will use. Minister, listening to you, I get the sense that had the NFM and particularly the rice mill at Carlson Field been under your remit, a lot of the discussions that we're having today may not have been necessary, that maybe a decision may have been more expeditiously been taken. I notice as well, and I'm just framing the question, I notice as well that you just indicated that you are going to have a meeting with the technical staff of the NFM tomorrow. I don't know whether the technical staff knows that, but what's the relationship with your ministry, yourself, and the line ministry for NFM, the Ministry of Trade, especially since you made a disclosure here today that there's going to be a local parboiling facility that will not be linked to local farmers. And the question really, in terms of all the three things I've said, what is that relationship with your ministry and the Ministry of Trade that you think would have been more fortuitous for decisions in the national interest, and particularly in the context of what we are inquiring into with respect to rice farmers, paddy production, and also including, if I may, with respect to the ADB and the financial sustainability?
The relationship with the Ministry of Trade and Industry and the Minister is excellent. I think both of us recognize that we have to work together because there are a lot of things that are symbiotic. So you would see on a number of things, including cocoa, that we work together. The relationship with having Carlson Field in the ministry, it was once in the ministry. Carlson Field was actually moved from the ministry into NFM maybe 2 or 3 decades ago. It was once an asset of the ministry. But I don't think that was the factor. I accept that the divestment process has taken very long, and it has to do with the view that you needed to have local rice farmers milling at that facility. And that is not a view that I share, and I am happy to know now that the possibility exists that we could have milling done by private investors investing in their own milling.
So in other words, Minister, there are two different views between yourself and the other ministry.
No, the decision to divest Carlson Field, as I said, is a decision that I met and found that it was better. It was not better. It ought to be done by NFM. It is their asset. And the issue of a parboiling plant became linked to that divestment. And I saw in working with the rice farmers and in listening to them that there was need to clearly remove ourselves from the divestment in terms of needing that facility or what becomes of it, and focusing on a mill that can focus on our local farmers. And when I say that the parboiling plant is not linked to local farmers, I mean, the parboiling plant is not going to be committed to work with local farmers, but we in the ministry, we would like to get our rice into the parboiling plant, and we have to make sure that the farmers understand that the opportunity will exist, but we need to improve our yields and we need to improve our production if we want to get in there.
Parboiling, private sector?
Private sector, yeah. And of course...
What about the water aspect? The farmers are being assisted with water for...
Well, again, before coming in, of course, you will recall that the Water Resources Agency took action against rice farmers for abstracting water from the watercourses during the dry season. They're entitled to do that, but the farmers are now able to get. Part of the problem was that you needed an abstraction permit, but it took 6 months for the field officer to come to do the visit. I don't think the rice farmers have difficulties in the abstraction permits, and in fact, last week the ministry was meeting with some of the rice farmers to position the pumps that we normally make available to them every year to ensure that they could have access to the water. Of course, the ultimate decision on putting water into the watercourses rests with WASA, so that we assist them with the infrastructure and the involvement of WASA, but the ultimate objection, if WASA believes that there is not enough available water in the dam to put into the watercourses, then they would not do that.
Well, Minister, thank you very much for your very frank and forthcoming comments. May I invite you to make closing comments if you have any?
Thank you very much I didn't see that this would be a national topic, but it is an important discussion. You've gone beyond what is listed there, and I'm happy to have been invited to participate, and I think that the country and the rice farmers have the opportunity to understand very clearly, and I expect that out of this, the rice farmers will organize themselves and they would put something in writing and they will come and sit with me and discuss. So I will go to them as I normally do, and that we'll be able to configure a sector and a relationship that the taxpayers can support.
Well, again, thank you very much, Minister, for attending, and I would like to thank all those others who were present today and who contributed for your contributions. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think that concludes our business today. I would like to declare the meeting suspended, and in closing, may I thank the NFM, ministry officials, the media, the viewing, and the listening public. Thank you.